Hey, and welcome to the Reset Podcast. Everything you need to know that your therapist probably never told you. Researched by experts, real life experiences. This is Reset. Hey, and welcome back to the Reset Podcast. We are so glad that you are here. This is going to be part 2 of our teen series. We're going to jump back into conversation with Joe and Casey. Let's go.
I think now what, you and I have noticed in the practice is really that there's a sense of belonging right now in being incongruent to my environment, of being different than my environment. The more I can kind of stick out in a really backwards, I guess, way, that's their sense of belonging now.
Yeah, nonconformity or being nonconformist is really the path they're taking. It was odd because we would say, not too long ago, it was totally where kids would relate through belonging through the aspect of being likeness, either image, identity. I want to be around people who are like me, and I want to be like others. So many ways. You think about when we were back in high school, back in the old days in the 1900s, maybe not you, but me, is the aspect you would kind of dress alike. You would connect. Your friends would be people you did life with, which would be like a sport or it'd be school or it may be. Now we're seeing completely different, where our teenagers are being such individuals where they are relating through their differences. And I would add on to that is they're actually wanting to relate to others with their pain and their own personal psychology, which for a lot of them is unhealthy. I can imagine trying to relate to my peers, especially as a teenager, through pain. If you think about it, there's several personality disorders in the DSM that evolves around personalities who relate through pain, chaos, conflict.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are doing that, and we see it because we see text messages they show us. Right, we see it through even screenshots of Snapchats that they show us, where people they call friends or people they're close to are really mean or tremendously different or chaotic. And I think we're seeing is the fact that they're starting to relate in those ways, which is kind of odd. Why would you want to relate to people through your pain, through your own mental illness, or through in the aspect of, not being liked, right, being different? And we're not talking about being different in a good way. We're talking about being different in terms of I don't want to be like anyone else, which is odd. And yet they say in the same sentence in many ways they feel lonely. And there's probably the reason why.
They will own and acknowledge that they fear becoming more healthy. They don't know what that would look like. They don't know if they would get their needs met in that way. And so they are ambivalent and fearful to actually get healthy.
Well, and that's a great point because we're seeing so much of popularity in high school with our kiddos is being highly dysfunctional, and versus being kind of like, I don't know, like how it used to be, just the person is just excelling in life was the popular one. And we're not seeing that. And instead we're seeing is this over-identifying with, let's say, even like mental diagnosis. Our teenagers talk to us more about mental diagnosis than I feel like we talked about in graduate school. It's wild about how many of them with TikTok and different streams of media where they talk to us about what they have, not knowing how they could be diagnosed with it, but they want to be diagnosed with it. Because if they're diagnosed with it, then they could be seen being different, odd, or strange, or weird, which is so interesting once again, where there used to be a subpopulation, maybe a sub of the subpopulation within teenagers. Now it's becoming the population. And so then when we get these kids who come from healthy families, from healthy dynamics, they start talking in these ways, which is outside their family culture, outside what even mom and dad are seeing. They're shocked when they start hearing, how the way they either communicate or how they're communicating, or what they're communicating, or what they're searching online, for example. They're shocked by it. But what it is the kids just want to have a sense of belonging. And how you belong right now is so many kids in high school or junior high is that you must have an issue or a problem. And I think we've been seeing that more when it comes to even the aspect of, I think, the last 5 years about sexuality. We've seen it with even gender. And we see that, and obviously this is the identity years of development, but now that's come in. Well, before, and we talked about this before, our whole practice, a lot of them, or wasn't it rare to say 50% of our practice was cutters? self-mutillators.
I think more than that.
Yeah, cutting, either, cutting or rubbers, people who rub, really hard, or burning, or I know there's a phase when kids would like swallow those small little circular batteries, and so they had stomach pain and just different self-mutilating concepts. And that was, you're right, we had so many of them. It was just part of your practice, and a large part of our treatment plans had evolved around self-mutilation or cutters. We don't see that. It's here. Also, we always have, I think it's a very small percentage of our clients. But as a theme for teenagers, that has tremendously gone away. But now we're seeing other things, we won't call them self-mutilating term of cutting, but more of mutilating emotionally. How would you word it?
I think that there's a couple of things that are going on. Is that you brought up earlier, right? That we're the most connected generation of all time, but we essentially are the most disconnected. And I think even disconnected from self, to the point that self-harm is actually no longer attractive to some of these kids in pain, because they are so disconnected from self in that way. But I do think that the self-harm now looks like an internal cut. And I think a lot of that internal wound that I'm experiencing is this aspect of shame.
Yep.
I am bad. And something that we reflect a lot is that when we have some of these self-harm type thoughts, again, not in the act of actually cutting ourselves, but in those internal wounds, they have these thoughts, and the thoughts don't necessarily have to be true. And part of these, I think, internal wounds, as we say, the internal cutting that we're seeing more of, is that a lot of the times our parents are telling us about our teens is that, like, they just want to be right. All they want to do is be right. My parents used to say the same thing to me when I was a teenager. You just want to be right. And some of that is actually true, but it actually works with their relationship with themselves too. And so they have some of these thoughts, right? I'm not enough. My parents don't love me. I am bad, which is the core really belief behind the aspect of shame. And so I always say, your thoughts don't have to be true. You just want to prove your thoughts right. And so we show up in the world with this filter to prove my thought right, even if it's not true. So it's like, my parents don't love me, or I'm not enough. Again, that might not be true, but I'm so desperate to be right because the brain actually gets fulfilled when we're right. There's a safetyness of being right in the world that these teens are going out. And that's some of that internal cutting, I think, that's going on, is what thoughts are they actually trying to prove right?
Well, it's a good point, where I think a lot of parents come from a place of wanting to have truth and have a relationship around having a true relationship with their kids about truth, while a lot of teenagers are coming from a place of being right, or wanting their brain just wants to be right. They're not wanting necessarily to be true or know the truth in so many ways. And that creates a lot of conflict within that dynamic. But it's true, where so much of today's self-mutilating is coming from this place of internal mutilating or emotional mutilating. And we see this where our kids will set up themselves for failure on purpose, where they purposely put themselves in a situation they know they're going to get caught from mom and dad, or they know that they're going to get in trouble, and they don't care because they're not about unity. They're about being right, once again. Or we see when it comes to even about social media, they will post certain pictures or post certain aspects of what they're doing or not doing, including their own mental health issues in all the wrong ways. And the byproduct of it is what? They get torn up with comments or people DMing them about things that are just inappropriate or wrong. And we also see, unfortunately, which we see since COVID, which talk about another thing about COVID that changed, is a lot of teenagers are, especially with young or college age kids, there's so much sexting occurring. Kids sending inappropriate pictures of themselves so freely to almost basically strangers of their own peers in age, just to get a sense of a comment from them. And most of the time, the comments are horrible and mean. And the byproduct of it is they come away with, like you said, guilt and shame, which ironically are the two emotions that Freud said that if you have one of those emotions, that there can't be growth in you. And so if you think about, if they're constantly having dosages of guilt and shame, that they're in many ways, like oddly enough, like seeking out, there isn't no growth. There isn't opportunity for change to occur when it comes to it.
This is the part of the show where we talk about things from the past.
Like the 1900s?
Life was so much simpler back in my day.
Like no cell phones or Netflix?
Our phones were attached to a wall. Mickey Mouse Club, Saved by the Bell, TGIF. Friends Seinfeld, Mr. Rogers, Care Bears, G.I. Joe. Shrinky Dinks, Cabbage Patch, Lincoln Log, Strawberry.
I have no idea what you're talking about, lady.
Oh, the good old days.
You know I'm excited about this new segment about season 2. The aspect of us talking about old shows, morals from old shows, which need to come back, and old products from, or old lifestyles from our childhood that need to come back as well.
It's true. I feel like we are now the generation and people saying, in my day, or do you remember when? And we used to make fun of our parents. And now that's us.
We are now the back in the day people.
Back in the 1900s.
I love how my clients say the 1900s. Things were just different in the 1900s. And I think one thing that you and I talked about, we wish that we could bring back, even though it's probably way more convenient now than it was when we were a kid, but we want to bring it back for our kids, is the concept of attendance of live TV. Because now everything is just, we either DVR it, I don't know if they call that anymore, just tape it or press record.
I don't know what we call
No. And Netflix or whatever it may be, is live TV made us learn the following things growing up. Number one, early is on time. Because you can't just be on time. You got to be about 2 or 3 minutes before because you never know. Right?
I know.
Second thing was, it brought people together. I was thinking about how we used to all come together on Wednesday nights for 90210. Or when it came to like Friends on Thursday night, like all of our friends would come together in high school and watch that.
Because it was the only time you could watch it.
And then the next day at school, or when you see people at work, you would talk about the episode. And then you didn't know when it's going to re-air. So then you had to, if you missed it, and your, you know, the VCR wasn't on channel 3 or whatever it was that make you do to tape it. Like you just got, you felt like you missed everything.
You missed out.
And so live TV taught us about time, community, created conversations if we weren't there or talking about it, because it was such an event.
This is an interesting one to talk about because I had brought this up, I think when I was doing a speaking engagement and just talking about entitlement. And someone was kind of surprised when I brought up, remember when we would have to show up to our TV shows. And I'm not saying we are entitling our children by doing this, but it's one extra little thing in the list of easy things our kids are having access to that could make kids entitled. I'm not saying it does, but you think about it, our kids sit down when we say, okay, you can watch 30 minutes of TV or whatever it is, and they get their little remote and they can watch whatever they want, whenever they want. That is showing a lack of discipline in the area of watching TV, which is kind of could sound like a silly thing, but it did teach us as kids that, you know, for me, I loved Rugrats, and Saturdays it was on at like 9:30, followed by Doug, and I knew I had to show up and be there to, like you were saying, there's special moments as families, because TV isn't necessarily bad, where, you know, you come together. We watched, Touched by an Angel and Seventh Heaven together, Monday nights and Sunday nights. I don't know if you all watched that as a family, but it was something where our whole family sat down. Or my mom and my brother watched Home Improvement together. That was their thing. TGIF, Full House, Family Matters, Step by Step, Boy Meets World. TGIF was a huge deal.
Pizza night and TGIF on Friday was it.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is really what's happening is on-demand living, right? On-demand living. What is the byproduct of our children or society in general of having on-demand living? Like we feel we're in control and power to watch what we want to watch when we want to watch it. Is that good? Bad? I think that's the concept we're talking about. As we realize is that we grew up with that live TV, which I really believe like it taught us how to be on time, how to manage our schedule and calendars, so we make sure that we were there for it. And I think it sounds odd. Maybe we didn't know that. Our parents didn't know that growing up. But I think it was just a huge part of who we became. And I think with on-demand now, and including this, I feel like our kids have so many options. And the options are and we have so many options. There's at times we spend more time
trying to
figure out what we want to watch, that I prefer NBC telling me what I need to watch on a Thursday night.
Prime time. This is what you're supposed to watch. Yeah.
Which is funny because the default of all this is we mainly just either watch Friends, but we go back to our
That's
old
what
school.
we're watching right now because it was good TV. And another thing I just thought of when you were speaking was patience.
Yes.
You had to wait a full week until the next episode came out you had to wait a full week until the next episode came out, which is interesting because we have gotten really into the Star Wars, what do you call them, miniseries? Sagas. And so our kids have to wait a whole week until it comes out, and then they have to wait for the new season. Because a lot of times they'll find something on Netflix that already has 6 seasons, and so they just, watch whatever, whenever, and they can watch as much as they want. And it's been this new concept for them and so interesting. And our daughter, what did she say one time? She said, I don't get it. Why do they always leave you hanging? She actually said, it doesn't make sense. I don't know what's going to happen.
Welcome to live TV. Welcome to our childhood. Yes. I also think there's another part of it, which is we had commercials.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
So we have, so commercials like restroom break for us, get the snacks. Break. But also commercial cut the intensity and it gave release of a lot of anxiety for us. And so I think about how our kids watch TV, especially when it comes to Star Wars. There's no break. There's 30 minutes of just intensity or anxiety. And I'm not sure that creates an anxious brain or not, but I was thinking the amount of times, I think a great example of this is if you ever watch the old school show 24 and you watch it on DVD, or on demand, is there's no commercial break. And so it's just constant intensity, right? It's like when we're watching that show, Homeland. It's constant intensity. So your brain is literally holding on to stress, anxiety, fear for a certain period of time until the end of the show. And then finally we get that release versus we grew up where every 5 or 7 minutes was a 2-minute break. And our brain's like, oh, I can relieve. So we had dosages of anxiety and stress. But that show gave us, and then we gave us a little break. And so our brain's like, okay, good. We can relax. And then we process it. Like, oh my gosh, can you believe what is happening? And then you start asking questions like, what is going to happen?
Yeah.
And we start thinking about it. Now everyone's just quiet for the 30 minutes. And then, it's just not, the interaction of TV, I think might have been better when it was live.
I think so too. And I didn't have a TV when I moved out at 18, went to college, and then lived on my own. I didn't have a TV. So I missed that whole recording time in our lives anyway. Because we just would watch stuff on DVD, Alias, Friends, things that we'd watched in the past, The Office, and movies. Because all we had was a DVD, VHS player. And so I kind of missed that whole recording, time in our lives. Did you feel like you still had to set up a time to watch the recorded, or was that more convenient? Were you kind of happy when you could do the recording?
Well, the recording was not what you think it is. First of all, majority of the time never worked. It and then something else is being taped, or you taped over something you shouldn't have. And it was always grainy, so it wasn't as clear, but it gave you what you needed. And so on the
VHS. I'm talking about.
What are you talking about?
No, I'm talking about when you DVR. Did you have DVR?
Whatever
that was? Because I used to do that. I used
something else, like
to tape movies.
Was it called not TiVo?
Oh, yes, it was.
Not TiVo's TiVo.
Guys, we're not experts in this. We were born in the 1900s.
Yes, we don't know.
But I did miss that whole period, and then it was like Netflix for me. I missed this whole period where you could record something you wanted to watch. I remember my dad recording Vikings games when we were at church, so he could go home and watch the game. And there wasn't as much internet, so it's not like you were finding out the score and stuff throughout, wherever you were.
And that's funny because sporting events is probably the one thing we do watch live.
Yeah.
And our kids, when they got to a certain age, they kept asking, is this live? I'm like, yeah.
Who
and they're
won?
like, is this happening right now? And I'm like, yes. They couldn't comprehend that this is actually happening right now because they're so used to on-demand living.
On-demand living.
Wanting things now.
It's crazy. So, I don't know. Maybe y'all can agree, not agree. I think there are definitely some conveniences. And I'm not going to lie, when a whole series gets released, it's so fun to be like, we can watch the next one and the next one. But then it's over. And it's kind of sad. There is this sweetness to waiting and learning to wait and learning to show up. And that, like we were saying, it's kind of been lost.
Things our kids will never have to live
They will never have to live
through.
They will never have to live through. Oh, lucky kids.
And now, back to the show.
I think they get frozen in that, right? Because guilt is I did something bad, and shame is that deeper I am bad, right? And so once they hit that aspect of shame, it's kind of like a black hole in which it does, I think, prevent them from growing. Because
Totally.
again, they are showing up in the world to make that to make that right. And so I am bad then becomes what they're proving to be right.
Which is all this is just an odd backwards way of getting that sense of belonging occurring. Think about the aspect of just seeing like inappropriate pictures or inappropriate text. I mean, it's just it's like there's a cliche I heard I always use, which is you're learning all the wrong ways to do a math problem. At the end of the day, you're never going to learn. You're never going to get it right. So many of our teens are doing this stuff. They're learning all the wrong ways to learn a math problem. Like if you really, it's like you're learning all the wrong ways on get the sense of belonging fed. Why can't we just have an authentic, genuine, vulnerable relationship with others?
Because I think in order to have a genuine, authentic, vulnerable relationship with others, you have to have a genuine, authentic, vulnerable relationship with yourself.
And a lot of them are playing these identities as if they're roles, and it's not their genuine self. It's not the families that they're coming from. They're doing it just to hopefully have a sense of belonging or to deflect opportunities that they may be getting bullied or whatever it may be, for example. And so what's happening is they're not walking through life with vulnerability. And if you start, and we know how the brain works, if you start acting a certain part, you become that part. So you act that part, you become that part over time, and it will seep into your identity, even though you don't want to be that or never want to be that way. And there's that, I don't know, I forgot who said this, but you cannot move forward in life without being vulnerable.
Beautiful quote.
Beautiful quote.
Beautiful. However, I do completely agree with that, though, because I don't think there can be true connection without vulnerability. But I think what's happening is that a lot of these kids are going through life putting on a false self. Sometimes I have clients that have multiple false selves, and they feel connection. They're getting connected to the false self, but since there's no vulnerability in the false self because it's not a true self, that's why they're going home feeling disconnected and lonely. Because so often it's like, yeah, they're surrounded by all these people, or they're getting good feedback, or they have all these Instagram likes, whatever it might be. And so there is a false sense of connection there, but that's not vulnerability. And it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable. And I think that's the other muscle that is so underdeveloped in this population, is that we have set them up to not have the muscle of courage. And without courage, I really don't think you can have vulnerability.
You know, you're right, but what they want to be courageous for, and I think a lot of them, they want to be. They say they are courageous because they express this about their identity or express this about their pain. I think we just got to realize if this is genuine, authentic identities that they're playing out, or even identity, or even pain, then there's a place where there's a sacred place for that, and the sacred place could be mom, dad. Sacred place could be your home. Sacred place could be therapy. Sacred place could be, if let's say you're, religious, maybe your pastor or your rabbi or something like that, right? There's a place for there to be that vulnerability of sacredness, but to display that in areas in which they are just open to be judged and have other people's opinion and walk away with such hurt and pain. And it's just, in many ways, it's this odd self-mutilating that they're doing of their heart, their mind, their wellness, and they do it, and we warn them. They still do it. Then they get feedback that's negative, yet they still do it because over time they can't go back because they've done it so often they're known as that person until they go away to college or until they get a fresh start or they move. And then we see changes in them that they don't want to carry on their high school self into college. They need like a lot of our kids talk about, I just wish I could do a redo. I wish I could restart my freshman year. I wish I could do, because they just unfortunately said things, posted things, or became something that they didn't want to be long term. Once again, executive function, just want to belong in junior high, let's say. And that's being carried over tremendously into then their high school years, that they cannot wait till they go away to college to get a fresh start and be something different, or honestly, not just different, go back to really a reset of who they are, which is their authentic self.
I agree. And I think that goes back to the idea of why some of them fear ultimately progress and health, right? Because they're actually being known for their dysfunction and dysregulation. And so to abandon that feels like they're abandoning themselves and their identity. And so they'll sit in that instead, even when it doesn't feel authentic. And so vulnerability has now just changed face, it feels like. Like there's, again, false vulnerability that people are online or just in basic conversation having these, what appears to me on the surface looks like these really deep talks, right? You're talking about your mental health to like anyone that listens. Whereas when I grew up, that was something very hush hush. Or something we only, like you said, kept for safe conversations. But now they show up in what looks like, quote, vulnerability, but I think it's a facade of vulnerability, and it's a very rigid vulnerability in the fact that it's not an integrated version of vulnerability where you can be vulnerable about both strength and weakness, about both health and unhealthiness. There's a one-sided vulnerability about unhealthiness and dysfunction that doesn't, again, feel authentic, if that makes sense. But there's no integration of like, there's these other parts of me as well. There's only this zoomed in version of what's wrong.
We're going to take a pause right here to end episode 2. Make sure that you jump back in next week to listen to episode 3. Thank you for listening to the Reset Podcast. We're so glad that you joined us. If you enjoyed this episode, would you take a moment to leave us a review and maybe even hit that subscribe or follow button? Also, pay it forward by sharing this podcast with a friend. For free resources and to learn more about coaching for individuals, athletes, couples, and teams, go to theresetgroup.com. And we would love to connect with you on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok @The Reset Group. See you soon.